Queen Elizabeth II lived her whole life in the public eye. Yet she remained an enigmatic figure throughout.
Well, she wasn't as other human beings, and yet, of course, she was. And that's the magic.
The particular genius of the Queen was that she retained an element of mystique while making the monarchy a much more modern institution.
The Queen never gave interviews, but there was one way we could discover what was deeply important to her.
When the Queen spoke, the country listened.
Through her annual Christmas Day speeches, and at just a handful of momentous occasions, the Queen spoke directly to us.
Together we are tackling this disease.
With powerful messages she wished to convey.
When there were those moments of national crisis that the special address was called for, from war to illness, she was there to make it.
I hope that we can unite in praying that their success will be as swift as it is certain.
She felt quite strongly that this was a moment to speak to the nation.
What I say to you now, I say from my heart.
Now we look back at these broadcasts to find out how they united us at times of national celebration and commemoration.
I speak to you today at the same hour as my father did exactly 75 years ago.
And what they reveal about the Queen's heartfelt values and beliefs.
Every religion has something to say about tolerance and respecting others.
The speeches reflect the way the nation was changing, and the Queen was so conscious that every word mattered.
I hope and pray that with God's help, and with the love and support of my family, I shall try to serve you in the years to come.
In 2020, the Queen's Christmas Day broadcast was recorded at Windsor Castle. The monarch was shielding here from the coronavirus pandemic that had brought the country to a halt. But the Queen was still determined to record her traditional message at this very difficult time.
Every year we herald the coming of Christmas by turning on the lights. And light does more than create a festive mood. Light brings hope.
Oh, sorry, ma'am, there's just a plane going overhead. Would you mind just pausing? It's a bit noisy on the flight path.
With the castle being close to Heathrow Airport, the filming took longer than usual.
The Queen had that sense of just getting on with it. It's a powerful part of the sense of vocation, sense of calling.
Right, so we've got a clear for the plane now. So again, in your own time, to camera A, please.
Every year we herald the coming of Christmas by turning on the lights.
The Queen was often known, I think, by the various crews who were there as 1-8 Windsor, because she just did it so smoothly and so professionally.
It is in that spirit that I wish you a very happy Christmas.
All cameras stop recording, please. Thank you so much.
The Christmas Day speech was an opportunity for the Queen to share her personal thoughts on issues that concerned her, with words to inspire the public. It was a coveted job to film the Queen, and in 1990, the producer was David Attenborough.
A monarch in the 21st century has to combine two things. It has to combine being a human being, but also being something other than a normal human being. And why do people turn out in millions to see the Queen? Because she wasn't as other human beings. And yet, of course, she was, and that's the magic.
I see what you mean. Clothes-wise, does it look all right with the background?
Yes, it does.
I mean, Johnny, like, it'd be awful if you said no, because I don't know something else.
For the Queen, the Christmas broadcast was very personal. people were inviting her into their home to watch it on television, but equally she was inviting them into her home.
When I was growing up in the early 50s, the gas was very irregular, and it was essential that we sat down at 3 o'clock for the broadcast. So my mother would put on the Christmas dinner very early in case the gas power disappeared and the lunch wasn't ready in time. And of course we stood up with the national anthem that preceded it. My father, a Victorian man, insisted on that. And there was an excitement and an anticipation.
It became an absolutely irreplaceable item of national life. Did you see the Queen's speech? What did you think of it this year?
It's for radio version.
It's for the radio version and a run-through of the words.
Mm-hmm. There were themes that ran through them all. Family, community, service, duty, resilience. So these themes that she built around them, I think, the specific words and specific stories that she would tell based upon what had been happening in her life and what was happening in the outside world.
Over the years, I have dwelt on the happier side of life in my Christmas broadcasts. We need reminding of it, particularly at Christmas time.
There's a sense in which that feeling of an almost parental figure, simply saying, well, now, this is what matters to us all, this is what ought to matter to us, and like it or not, it's my job to remind you of that.
Looking at the morning newspapers, listening to the radio, and watching television, it's only too easy to conclude that nothing is going right in the world. Yet there is a lot of good news, and some wonderful things are going on, in spite of the frightening headlines.
Time and again, that message is one of uplift, but also of unity, a kind of morale booster.
Goodwill towards men is not a hollow phrase. We know what wonderful things it can achieve.
Hearing the reassuring voice of the monarch at Christmas was a tradition started by the Queen's grandfather, King George V. He joined forces with the nation's broadcaster, the BBC. On the 19th of December 1932 at Broadcasting House in London, the BBC launched its Empire service. The timing was perfect. 6 days later, on Christmas Day, the King was able to harness the revolutionary wireless technology to speak live to people in Britain and around the world from his home in Sandringham.
British people all the world over are listening for the voice of His Majesty the King. Through one of the marvels of modern science, I am enabled this Christmas Day to speak to all my peoples throughout the Empire.
The Christmas broadcasts serve two main purposes. On the one hand, to try and convey a message of support for a far-flung imperial people, that the monarch really cared about their welfare. And on the other, to try to encourage them to serve the monarchy and the empire's needs. Whether it be in the military or through the economy, it was all about service.
For it offers us immense possibilities to make that union closer still.
Broadcasting live to the Empire was a powerful new way for the monarch to connect directly with the people, but it did rely on a fluent and confident delivery. The Queen's father, George VI, famously struggled with a stammer.
As the revered head of a great family.
Princess Elizabeth, growing up, would have been very aware of her father's difficulties, as speaking on the radio was so traumatic for him.
Elizabeth learnt many things from her father and grandfather's broadcast. Basically, the fact you had to do it whether you liked it or not, but also the fact, and she may not have been conscious of it at that young age, that this was the essence of modern monarchy. This is how you connect with people, ordinary people, everybody.
But it was at a time of crisis rather than Christmas that the 14-year-old Princess Elizabeth made her first national broadcast. With the country at war in 1940, she spoke to children being evacuated with words of encouragement.
My sister Margaret Rose and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all.
It was her first big royal duty on the national stage, on the world stage. And the words of this speech, intimate, connecting, had an immense impact. And from that moment, the little princess really became a massive national asset.
And when peace comes, remember, it will be for us, the children of today, to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place.
After the sudden death of her father, Princess Elizabeth became queen at the age of 25. The sole responsibility of addressing the nation directly at extraordinary times and at Christmas now lay with her.
Since my accession 10 months ago, your loyalty and affection have been an immense support and encouragement. I want to take this Christmas Day, my first opportunity, to thank you with all my heart.
One of the things the Queen referenced in her early speeches, time and again actually, was her need for the people's support. This was very much an acknowledgement that really she reigned only through people's goodwill.
In post-war Britain, the Queen's young female voice was in sharp contrast to the gravelly tones of her father and grandfather, adding to the sense that the country was being reborn.
I want to show that the crown is not merely an abstract symbol of our unity, but a personal and living bond between you and me. And so it is that this Christmas Day, I want to send a special message of encouragement and good cheer.
And there was soon a new challenge for the Queen that none of her predecessors had had to contend with. In 1957, 25 years after her grandfather had broadcast the first Christmas message from Sandringham, the Queen allowed cameras into the house. It was going to be televised, and just to add to the pressure, like the radio broadcast before, it too would be live. And the prospect filled the Queen with dread.
She's essentially a very shy person, so sort of having to speak to camera didn't come naturally to her. The Christmas speech was her really big sort of hurdle when that started being televised.
And to make matters worse, less than favourable comments about the Queen had hit the headlines.
In 1957, Lord Altrincham, a peer but a maverick, took it on himself to criticise the Queen's method of speaking in public.
And of course it was seized by the tabloids as a scandal.
Altrincham said that she had the delivery of a priggish schoolgirl. You know, that she sounded like the captain of the hockey team.
I mean, to judge from your article, you expect the Queen to be a better orator?
All I would like to see is the Queen's own character coming through.
Altrincham's remarks, they can only have been painful for the still young Queen. She always knew that she didn't come over as the most approachable figure, that her delivery wasn't necessarily the best. It can only have piled on the pressure.
But there was one person, more than any other, who helped the Queen that Christmas.
Prince Philip had been the backbone of this speech, if you like, because he's always helped the Queen. He was far more savvy with the media and with cameras and with broadcasting than the Queen was at the beginning of her reign. The Queen came in and everything was set up, the camera was there, the cameramen, everything was running. And as soon as she sort of saw the auto cue, she froze.
Prince Philip used to actually stand behind the cameras, he did on this first broadcast, and clown around to make her laugh, to make her break into a smile, because otherwise she looked a bit formal and unapproachable, which wasn't the idea at all. Philip was a really important part of this, encouraging her to do the broadcast.
Just imagine it, the pressure. Her first live television Christmas broadcast.
25 years ago, my grandfather broadcast the first of these Christmas messages. Today is another landmark, because television has made it possible for many of you to see me in your homes on Christmas Day.
At the time, it was quite extraordinary seeing the Queen speak, surrounded by Christmas cards and photos of her children, rather than simply hearing her words, as had happened in the past.
I cannot lead you into battle. I do not give you laws or administer justice. But I can do something else. I can give you my heart.
And there's that wonderful smile at the end. It was as if Lord Altrincham had never been. This is a young woman doing her best. We know that later she did take various forms of tuition and adaptation in her speaking voice. But at the time, the public, of course, were all the more behind her.
And that pledge to give people her heart helped create a powerful bond between the public and the monarch. The Queen reflected on this deep connection in her Diamond Jubilee message in 2012, marking 60 years on the throne. It was one of only a handful of times, aside from her Christmas messages, that she addressed the nation directly.
The events that I have attended to mark my Diamond Jubilee have been a humbling experience. It has touched me deeply to see so many thousands of families, neighbours and friends celebrating together in such a happy atmosphere.
From the very start, the Queen was very explicit about her need of the public's support. And as Jubilee after Jubilee had unfolded, no monarch before had lived and reigned that long. So that the generosity and warmth of public response, I can see why she said it was humbling.
The Diamond Jubilee speech was very largely about gratitude. She was aware that the support wasn't a given. People should know she wasn't taking it for granted.
I will continue to treasure and draw inspiration from the countless kindnesses shown to me in this country and throughout the Commonwealth. Thank you all.
Good morning, Mum.
Good morning, Robert.
For the Queen's Christmas message, preparations on the draft script would often start many months before, as she worked closely with her private secretary.
Ma'am, you've got the latest text, I think, of the broadcast, which I've been having a go at over the last week or two.
The Queen would define at a fairly early stage some of the points of the year that she regarded as important. And very often we would then consult one or two other people, not a lot of people. It may be someone in the Church of England, someone in the military, and discuss them very often with Prince Philip as a sort of three-way process to reflect, to refine what the themes should be.
And I did incidentally show it the other day to the Prime Minister.
The tight inner circle of people privy to the text of the speech also included the Prime Minister of the day, who'd be offered a draft as a matter of courtesy.
It was not the work of Number 10 or the politicians. It was the Queen's personal speech to the nation. But the Queen's gift of reflecting the problems that the nation faced at the time and dealing with them in a non-partisan way, it wouldn't have been easily done. No doubt in early drafts were many things struck out because upon rereading them you could see how they might be presented as political. So the Queen's speech, although short, would have been the product of an extraordinary amount of thought and work.
But in 1973, Prime Minister Edward Heath had strong views about the content. It had been a difficult year as a fuel crisis brought the country to a standstill. There were strikes, and the government took drastic action. A shortage of fuel led to power cuts.
We are limiting the use of electricity by almost all factories, shops and offices to 3 days a week.
The Queen had wanted to make some acknowledgement of the dreadful time that the country was having.
Now, Edward Heath, the Prime Minister, asked her not to do that. Perhaps he felt it would reflect upon his own government if the country was facing such difficulties.
The Queen even came back with a suggestion of a more general, less specific reference, and again, her Prime Minister, Edward Heath, said no.
Now, the Queen didn't have to accept that view, but she decided as a matter of courtesy that she would accept Edward Heath's view. The Queen obviously has to maintain good relationships with her Prime Minister, and so there was nothing about the difficulties the country was facing in that broadcast.
Her constitutional role was to be above politics. And I think she probably thought that was an important part of her job, to keep it like that.
It does show the difficulties of securing the right balance. It's a remarkable achievement that none of us can say what the Queen's views were on almost any political issue over the very long term of her reign. It's a difficult thing to achieve, but the Queen did do it for a very long time.
Every Christmas Day speech was broadcast not just to a British audience, but to the entire Commonwealth. The Queen's words would reinforce the importance she placed on this unique organisation.
The comradeship and cooperation it inspires, and the friendship and tolerance it encourages. These are the qualities needed by all mankind.
The Queen was head of the Commonwealth, which represented nearly a third of the world's population, and she remained deeply committed to it throughout her reign.
From the winter of faraway England, she flew in over the blue Caribbean.
Five months after her coronation, the Queen embarked on her first tour of the Commonwealth, accompanied by Prince Philip.
I think it's immediately apparent to the Queen, when she ascends to the throne, that she has a new role. So when she begins the tour after her coronation, for the first time this is a British monarch going overseas, not as the symbol of authority and rule, but almost as someone asking that the countries of a newly emerging independent Commonwealth remain together. And I think that's a very, very significant change in the nature of the relationship between the Queen and the empire that is transforming into the new Commonwealth.
Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, what becomes really clear from Elizabeth's Christmas broadcasts is the fact that the language that she uses is so positive. There is absolutely no anguish or anger or negativity attached to Britain losing the empire.
Ghana, freedom. Ghana, land of freedom. Their Highnesses the rulers of the Malay state do hereby proclaim a sovereign, democratic and independent state.
This year, Ghana and Malaya joined our brotherhood. Both these countries are entirely self-governing. Both achieved their new status amicably and peacefully.
We had an empire that was involuntary, but the Commonwealth was voluntary. It helped to bind wounds that had inevitably arisen during the years of empire. That appealed to the Queen's sense of bringing people together.
In October, 51 representatives of Commonwealth governments met in Edinburgh, very much in the spirit of a family gathering. Being united, that is, feeling a unity of purpose, is the glue that bonds together the members of a family, a country, a Commonwealth.
We enjoyed it very much.
And I think it's worth remembering that when the Commonwealth is showcased, it's because she's not just the Queen of the people in the British Isles, but she is also Queen of over a dozen countries overseas. So she's integrally linked to the Commonwealth. It's, I think, very much in the DNA of her reign.
It was on her first Commonwealth trip, a tour of South Africa with her parents, when the 21-year-old Princess Elizabeth made a broadcast that included a profoundly significant vow.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
The coming-of-age speech becomes really quite prophetic in the light of her father's untimely demise a few years later. The idea behind the speech is to try and reassure the peoples of the empire that she would continue to reign over her own people and look after the fast-changing Commonwealth.
That South Africa trip would also influence the future monarch's views on race and discrimination.
Although South Africa hadn't then adopted apartheid, there was still segregation between the races. And George VI, her father, was told that he must not talk to black soldiers who were receiving medals. And the king objected to that very strongly.
At a special investiture, His Majesty movingly acknowledged his debt to people who had come to his aid at a time when I was beset by many and powerful enemies.
The king made sure that he did speak to black soldiers who were being given medals. And I believe that had a great impact on the Queen.
It is quite striking that the Queen used Christmas and the Christian message of love, peace, brotherhood, tolerance, a non-racist approach to all human beings, and that's reflected in her Christmas messaging.
No more so than in 2004, when racist attacks and extremism were on the rise in Britain, and she used her Christmas broadcast to deliver a powerful message.
Religion and culture are much in the news these days, usually as sources of difference and conflict, rather than for bringing people together. But the irony is that every religion has something to say about tolerance and respecting others.
It's not at all surprising that when she speaks about race in 2004, she speaks about the parable of the Good Samaritan.
It is a timeless story of a victim of a mugging who was ignored by his own countrymen, but helped by a foreigner, and a despised foreigner at that.
The subtext of what she's saying in that address is that the person who goes to the help of the person in need is the outsider, the foreigner who is hated and suspected. And when you think of the role of the people who come to this country for work in maintaining so much of our public service, the health service particularly, it is literally true, of course, that we have depended on incomers, newcomers, for our very lives. And it meant a great deal to her.
I work within the health service.
Health service?
I'm a member of the Royal College of Nursing. Do a lot of work around diversity within the workplace.
It's wonderful work to be doing. Some people feel that their own beliefs are being threatened. Some are unhappy about unfamiliar cultures. They all need to be reassured that there is so much to be gained by reaching out to others, that diversity is indeed a strength and not a threat.
Took some courage to take on this, this issue, if you like. I remember her commenting to me, she had an extraordinary number of letters on that broadcast, both pro and anti the views that she was expressing about the importance of tolerance. And there were quite a lot of strong views that she got as a result of that, stronger than usual for some of her Christmas broadcasts. I don't think she saw it as a hugely courageous thing to do, but I think it probably was. In a way, her letters were her kind of social media, if you like.
The Christmas Day speeches reflected the changing times the Queen lived through, but they also looked to the future.
Perhaps the launching of Telstar has captured the imagination most vividly. This tiny satellite has become the invisible focus of 1 million eyes.
The Christmas broadcast adapted over the years as technology changed, but equally, the Queen adapted as well with television because of the way you overlay pictures of what the royal family have been engaged with and who they've been meeting.
In Los Angeles, we went to see the space shuttle. I find it fascinating to sit here and do a simulated landing.
Forward window. Can you see the heads-up display there? 1,500 feet starting our platform tonight.
During her Christmas broadcasts, she tried to make those few minutes so much more interesting and alive for her audience, across generations, across the globe.
Well, it's heading the runway anyway. It was a great relief to find I hadn't crashed it.
Until the early 60s, the Queen's festive message was always live. Pre-recording it a few days before Christmas in different locations gave producers like Sir David Attenborough the opportunity to be just a bit more adventurous.
Every year, this Christmas party is held for the children of the people living in the mews of Buckingham Palace.
I thought that it was just to vary from sitting at a desk. Couldn't we find an occasion on which the Queen was being very queenly and regal and royal, and yet very human? There was an event just before Christmas when the Queen, by custom, holds a children's party. And that year it was being held in the royal stables. And I thought, just great, you know, stable, Christmas, one thing another.
These are some of the horses that were drawing the carriages at the time of the wedding last in the summer. Have you been to one of these parties before?
Yes.
Is this the first time you've been? Is it? Yes. I'll get bitten in a minute.
Because it was the stables, there were horses in the background. And the Queen came down and delivered her speech to, of course, a teleprompter, but absolutely immaculately and perfectly.
For the children, the party and the meeting with Father Christmas are perhaps the most exciting part of the evening.
And the cameraman said, no, go again. I said, what on earth? I mean, would you leave the lender's cap on, for heaven's sake? What does the matter? And he said, well, there was one of these horses that was immediately behind the Queen in the stables. And just as she started, he got that itch, horse's gait. And so it was going like this, you see. And he said it looked as though the horse was a ventriloquist or something, you see.
As the productions became more ambitious, so too did the locations.
I usually make my Christmas broadcast to the Commonwealth from Windsor or Buckingham Palace. This year, I thought I would use the presence of 2,000 children at this occasion, organised by the Save the Children Fund in the Albert Hall.
I think the Queen sat through more speeches than most people. And I think she probably had cause to reflect more than most of us that long speeches are inherently quite trying. And so she had this very, very clear view that her speeches were going to be short. She felt that she could say a lot in a few words, and she stuck to that. It was a very, very important rule of thumb.
I wish you all a very happy Christmas. God bless you.
Whilst the Queen's Christmas Day speech was a yearly fixture, she spoke directly to the nation outside of those broadcasts on just a few significant occasions. In 1991, when British ground troops were sent into action during the First Gulf War, the Queen chose to make the first televised national address of her reign.
As a nation, we are rightly proud of our armed forces. That pride has been fully justified by their conduct in the Gulf War so far.
Prime Minister at the time, John Major, took the decision to send 35,000 British troops to join a US coalition against Iraq.
The Iraq War was a very serious undertaking. There was a very great risk that the Iraqis had chemical and biological weapons, and the risk of them using them was absolutely in the forefront of our minds, and I know it was in the forefront of the Queen's mind as well. And we had British men and women going into action and risking their lives.
This was the first time British troops had been deployed in such numbers since the Second World War. And of course, the Queen was the person to whom troops swore their allegiance. They fought in the name of Queen and country.
Her father had given a speech at the outbreak of World War II, and I think she had a very clear view that making an address for her armed services and to the nation was not only appropriate but necessary.
The Queen decided, and it was her decision, she was not pushed by Number 10. She wished to convey it particularly to the servicemen and women, but also to their families, that it was a just war. Make it clear to them that they had the absolute support of the nation. No one could have done that with the same authority as the Queen.
As they, with our allies, face a fresh and yet sterner challenge, I hope that we can unite in praying that their success will be as swift as it is certain, and that it may be achieved with a smaller cost in human life and suffering as possible. Then may the true reward of their courage be granted, a just and lasting peace.
She took care to balance the militaristic with the humanitarian note.
There was a very positive response to the Queen's speech. Immediately the war ended, I flew out to see our troops, and I got a very clear response from them. And we also had a substantial mailbag from the public, from the families, that spoke very warmly of the speech. It really mattered. It resonated.
Another of the Queen's rare special addresses was also inspired by her father. George VI had made a speech on VE Day to mark the historic moment of national celebration at the end of World War II.
I speak to you today at the same hour as my father did exactly 75 years ago.
Let us remember the men in all the services, and the women in all of the services who have laid down their lives.
His message then was a salute to the men and women at home and abroad who had sacrificed so much in pursuit of what he rightly called a great deliverance.
This was a remarkable chance for her to connect with history. And because it was royal history, she was connecting with her own family, with her father, who had been the voice of the nation in those times of great military challenge. And for people who don't perhaps know what VE Day meant or stood for, she brought those moments of national challenge and national triumph back to life. A reminder, too, of the way in which the military and the monarchy are bound together.
When the Queen spoke, the country listened. The visibility of the monarchy is important, but over-visibility is a risk as well. And the Queen, I felt, always had an innate sense of what that visibility should be and how communication with the country really needed to work.
And when it came to the visibility of the Queen's children, it wasn't until the late 60s that she judged the time had come to include her growing family in her Christmas Day speeches.
In October this year, I took my son and daughter with me to the opening of Parliament at Westminster.
Oh, I see. It's my grandfather, King George V. And this was the first time he went to the
FA Cup final.
And that year was the year I was born.
By 1984, the Queen and her extended family were in full and relaxed view as they gathered in the green drawing room at Windsor for the christening of Prince Harry.
When the children are included in the visuals of the Christmas speech, it's always incredibly popular. I remember William, I think, and Zara sort of running around, and there was the Queen chatting. I think she was talking about how they named puppies.
It's called Dash. Dash. And, you know...
I think that she also recognised that for some, it would be a lonely experience, a painful time.
Some may be far from home, and others lonely or sick. There are many people of all ages who go out to help the old and the lonely, but I am well aware that there are many of you who are alone or bereaved or suffering.
So it was very much in her thoughts that not everyone was enjoying Christmas.
The Queen innately understood that she was talking both as a queen and as someone who people could connect with. People could see over the years the Queen and her family changing as all families do.
Like many people, the Queen would experience the pain of marriage breakdown within her family. In 1992, 3 of her children went through divorce or separation. Her speech to mark the 40th anniversary of her accession made headlines for the way it reflected on events personal to her.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure. In the words of one of my more sympathetic correspondents, it has turned out to be an annus horribilis.
To make matters worse, her beloved family home at Windsor suffered a devastating fire.
I think 92 was a pretty awful year, and that was evident in the Christmas broadcast.
Like many other families, we have lived through some difficult days this year. The prayers, understanding and sympathy given to us by so many of you, in good times and bad, have lent us great support and encouragement.
It's an acknowledgement of what's happened, but trying to put it into some sort of context, that other families have comparable problems. We're only human after all.
As some of you may have heard me observe, it has indeed been a sombre year.
That was an unusual moment of public vulnerability. As if she wanted to say, look, I'm not going to pretend. This has been a difficult and traumatic year, and lots of you know about difficulty and trauma, so let's not pretend it's not there. And it's now relentlessly in the public eye. People lapped it up. It must have been very hard for the Queen.
It was 5 years later, in 1997, that a family tragedy became a national one.
A short while ago, Buckingham Palace confirmed the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. The princess died following a car accident in Paris. She was 36.
The second time the Queen made a special televised address directly to the public was one of the most difficult speeches she would ever make in her reign.
This is BBC One. Now we go live to Buckingham Palace for a tribute from Her Majesty, the Queen.
Since last Sunday's dreadful news, we have seen throughout Britain and around the world an overwhelming expression of sadness at Diana's death.
When the tragedy occurred, the Queen had remained at her Scottish home, Balmoral, with her grandsons. But in London, huge crowds had gathered to pay tribute to the princess.
What I found so extraordinary is these thousands and thousands and thousands of people milling around on the Mall, and their basic complaint seemed to be, we're really, really hurting and you're not.
She felt the main priority was to look after her grandchildren, William and Harry, and also she belonged to the generation that grew up in the war, when you didn't show your feelings in public too much.
5 days after Diana's death, the Queen did respond to the public mood and made her broadcast.
I asked her if she could either record it or go live, and she said, I'll go live. It was as simple as that.
So what I say to you now, as your Queen and as a grandmother, I say from my heart.
I think that was a kind of signal saying, look, again, many of you will know what family tragedy and family bereavement is about. I'm not going to pretend that it's otherwise for me.
A lot of thought went into the backdrop, not anything official and ceremonial, but a backdrop of people, of the crowds. So this was really reinforcing the message. It showed the Queen almost at one with the people.
I admired and respected her for her energy and commitment to others, and especially for her devotion to her 2 boys.
She spoke about how the princess had made so many people happy, and above all said that she spoke as a grandmother. I think all of that hit such an exact note for the country.
It's amazing, in fact, how quickly popular opinion did begin to come back to support the Queen.
May those who died rest in peace, and may we, each and every one of us, thank God for someone who made many, many people happy.
A reference to God or faith was a defining feature in almost every speech the Queen gave to the nation. Right from the start in the Christmas message before her coronation at Westminster Abbey, the Queen asked that people should pray for her.
To pray that God may give me wisdom and strength to carry out the solemn promises I shall be making, and that I may faithfully serve Him and you all the days of my life.
She speaks in her Christmas broadcast very clearly and very definitely, often, about the importance of Christian faith. Not just about the Christmas story, but about the guiding light that her Christian faith gives her.
For me, the life of Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, whose birth we celebrate today, is an inspiration and an anchor in my life. A role model of reconciliation and forgiveness, he stretched out his hands in love, acceptance, and healing.
The Queen certainly believed that she was upheld by her faith, that she could always turn to God. It's not surprising, I think, that somebody in a very exposed position of being a symbolic focus, even if not exactly political power in the old sense, should feel that need.
There are times when she's very, very clear and explicit. During 2000, for example, she said, quite in these terms, of course, but you know, I'm going to speak rather more personally and rather more clearly about my faith in the 2000th anniversary of our Lord's birth.
To many of us, our beliefs are of fundamental importance. For me, the teachings of Christ and my own personal accountability before God provide a framework in which I try to lead my life. I, like so many of you, have drawn great comfort in difficult times from Christ's words and example.
She's spoken about how her faith directs her life, that it's the light for her.
I believe that the Christian message, in the words of a familiar blessing, remain profoundly important to us all. Go forth into the world in peace. Be of good courage. Hold fast that which is good. Render to no man evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the afflicted. Honor all men.
She was quite revealing about her own personal faith in that speech. And I do recall that she discussed it with Prince Philip, who I think provided the idea of ending with the words of a very familiar Christian blessing at the end.
It is a simple message of compassion, and yet as powerful as ever today, 2,000 years after Christ's birth.
The Queen and Prince Philip shared a deep interest in Christian faith and ideas. In April 2021, the Queen's beloved husband of more than 70 years died just before his 100th birthday. She had lost the person who had, over the years, influenced her speeches more than any other.
In the Duke's lifetime, they were always a double act.
All too often, I fear Prince Philip has had to listen to me speaking. Frequently, we have discussed my intended speech beforehand, and as you will imagine, his views have been expressed in a forthright manner.
The Duke of Edinburgh had a hugely important role because he was a man of strong views.
The Queen loved the feedback that she got from Prince Philip. He was her ideas man. That ingredient vanished from her life with his death, and she would have missed that.
In every aspect of her life, not just in writing speeches, he had been there, and I've no doubt that there was a very great loss when he died.
At the time of Prince Philip's funeral, the country was still in the grip of the devastating coronavirus pandemic. 1 year earlier, the virus had threatened to overwhelm the NHS. Drastic measures forced the country into lockdown. At this time of national emergency, the 93-year-old Queen would record a message to the nation.
I was quite worried about this. And because I was going to be the only person in the room, I didn't want to be the one responsible for passing the virus to the Queen. The royal staff left, and it was just me and Her Majesty in the room to record the address. It felt like a speech to a country that was on a war footing.
I'm speaking to you at what I know is an increasingly challenging time. A time of disruption in the life of our country. A disruption that has brought grief to some, financial difficulties to many, and enormous changes to the daily lives of us all.
The country was in a state of real crisis. The country needed reassuring.
I want to thank everyone on the NHS frontline, as well as care workers and those carrying out essential roles, who selflessly continue their day-to-day duties outside the home in support of us all.
When the Queen references frontline workers and others who make sacrifices in the context of the pandemic, she's saying, I've noticed, I've recognised, not I as Elizabeth Windsor, but I on behalf of the society am telling you, your work has been seen and valued.
I think the coronavirus speech was one of her best in terms of tone, pitch, timing, effect.
I also want to thank those of you who are staying at home, thereby helping to protect the vulnerable.
It was a really good example of where she does manage to get involved in a very contemporary issue, but she is genuinely above it, above the politics of it. And that I think was why it was so effective.
We will succeed, and that success will belong to every one of us. We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
The "we will meet again" theme, if you like, the wartime spirit, she could say that in a way that no one else could. The sense that we were in it together and we would work this through. I think it was a wonderfully timed speech which reflected what we needed to hear, and she read the mood of the nation, I think, absolutely faultlessly.
But for now, I send my thanks and warmest good wishes to you all.
Throughout the many decades of her long reign, the Queen's speeches were made sparingly, yet her words were always profound and deeply revealing.
It's quite remarkable to watch those early broadcasts and see the shyness of her, and then over the years growing into the job. And with her age, greater wisdom, greater perspective.
The broadcasts are an amazing archive, which reflect not only the way the world was changing around her, but also the way that the Queen changed.
I shall never forget that scene outside Buckingham Palace in June, in this Jubilee year.
Future historians will look at these speeches very carefully.
The Queen will be remembered as having helped steer Britain successfully, where people weren't simply prepared to accept the monarchy as a traditional institution, but ask, what is good of it? What does it do? The Queen showed that it did have a purpose, namely as a public service monarchy.
To go on year after year, speaking to the public, knowing that you must fulfill that part of your role, that's what people expect of you, and still find something worth hearing, that does show strength and depth, and a person of real human awareness.
To have maintained that sheer involvement in what the nation is concerned about, and to have done so without chasing populist instincts, and expressed it in a way that was non-controversial. It is a remarkable achievement for anyone.
We can only dispel the clouds of anxiety by the patient and determined efforts of us all. It cannot be done by condemning the past or by contracting out of the present.
I think if one thinks about the legacy of these speeches, it's quite a private glimpse that you see of quite a private person in an extraordinarily public role. And you get a sense of her.
Let the light of Christmas, the spirit of selflessness, love, and above all hope, guide us in the times ahead.
Wherever you may be, all the fun and enjoyment and the peace of a very happy Christmas.